r/AskReddit. To those people who found out their parent had a second secret family, how did you discover the truth? What happened afterwards? My mom was a university student when she met my biological father. He was older, classy as fuck, dressed in suits, had a Mercedes, swept her off her feet. They started dating, and he took her out to amazing places, went all out, met the parents. This guy spent literally all day with her, kept staying in my mom's house from early morning until late at night, spent all his money on my mom, and whatever she wanted. Even when he was home he was stuck to the landline, early 90s, phone. My mom went to his house and met his parents. They made dinner and congratulated the beautiful couple, even mentioning that they could hear wedding bells. She also met his siblings and other family members, who were supportive. My mom decided she had to finish her master's degree before settling down, which looking back was a good idea. My mom got pregnant with me, and while I wasn't planned, she was over the moon and told my biological dad. He acted kind of weird, but she attributed it to the news. Then he started to not take her calls, to slip out early, ignore her needs. When she asked him to start getting ready for the baby, diapers, crib, pregnancy/birth stuff, he wouldn't pay attention to her. It got to the point she basically told him to either step up or go to hell, and he said he couldn't take care of the baby because he had like 5 others. Turns out he was a married man with kids who actually fully lived with his family. He just liked to frequent young women and his family supported this, to the point they would normally meet the women he swindled and act like he didn't have a wife at home and a troop of kids waiting for their dad. My mom was shocked. She officially broke up with him, sent him to hell, called his wife to tell her. The wife knew, but regarded my mom as a slut who seduced her good husband and has stayed with him until this day. I don't know my half brothers and sisters because they are still brainwashed and think their dad is amazing and he could do no wrong. Stupidly enough, my mom always spoke of him positively, even though he's never even given me a call or a birthday card. I've been trying to add my biological dad on Facebook/sent him messages asking to talk so I can get closure, but he deletes my friend requests and leaves me on read. His wife, his kids, my mom, me, we didn't deserve this. He might had seen this whole ordeal as just a couple months of fun, but my life was created this way. That is my beginning. Sometimes I want him to die, other times I wanna hug him. Mostly die, though. This isn't exactly the same kind of thing, but I figured my story was kind of similar, so I guess I'll share. Growing up my parents fought a lot. My mom had my brother when she was 14 to 15. My brother's father abandoned them. She then married my dad and had me when she was 18 to 19. They stayed together a while longer into their early 20s and had my little sister. They divorced when I was 8, and growing up they had ongoing custody battles. My brother was my half brother, but since we lived together I never really thought about it. My sister has always been the one with the darkest skin tone and hair. Both my parents are pretty dark. My mom is half Persian Iranian and my dad is indigenous, Mexican, and white. Me and my brother grew up looking the whitest in our family. I never thought much of it. One day, my mom asked me if I wanted to go pick her friend up with her. This guy friend of hers. We drove to the casino where he was at and she introduced him to me. He looked at me really weird, so I assumed he was a perv. Flash forward, he starts living with us. Lots of men lived with us throughout the years, so this was a common thing growing up. I had just gotten back to the school after a softball game and my mom was there to pick me up. She asked me to sit at the picnic table outside and talk with them. She then tells me this guy could possibly be my father. My dad didn't care when my mom got pregnant and decided to be my father. He put his name on my birth certificate and raised me as his own. But boy did me and this guy look similar. I remember we had similar looking feet. He even showed us pictures of his family members that I looked so much alike. I found out I could possibly have a half brother a few years younger than me. My dad knew that I knew and told me that if I wanted we could get a DNA test done. I refused for a long time because I didn't want to know. I believed the man who raised me was my father and that was that. My possibly BO dad was a drunk. One night he ended up punching my mom in the face and she kicked him out. I blocked him on social media and out of my life for a few years. I contacted him again about a year ago and found out he's doing much better. No longer a drunk, he's engaged and has his own garden now. Sent me pictures of his new truck and his garden. At that point I was ready for a DNA test and asked him if he would be up for it. He said we'd split the cost and to tell him when and where to meet up. We haven't done it yet, but soon I hope to talk to him again so we can. Not myself, but my mother and grandmother had a bad situation with my biological grandfather. My grandmother was 17 or 18 at the time when she met my 30-year-old grandfather and had an ongoing relationship for years. Then my grandmother got pregnant with my mother and things became sour very quick. My grandfather had made it very clear to my grandmother that he had a previous marriage that didn't work out and had 2 children prior to their split, but in actuality he was still married in a on again off again sort of relationship with his wife, but still very much in that relationship. When my grandmother found out she ended their relationship but was now still both with an infant child on her own, because her parents disowned her for having a child out of wedlock and essentially at the mercy of God, that she could afford it essentially on her own. A few years passed and my grandfather got back in touch with my grandmother and told her he wished to be a part of my mother's life, something my grandmother didn't feel right about denying my mother regardless of their issues, and she honestly felt she needed some help. He financially helped support my mother, but my grandmother still felt something was off. He would visit on lunch breaks from work, or my mother would have to come down and wait for him at his workplace, and he never showed up on holidays or weekends, and he never ever would bring her to his home. This sort of odd relationship went on for 4 or 5 years, and my grandmother had grown very skeptical of his secretive ways, and my mother, growing into her teens, became perceptive of his lies and odd behavior, but he was still there enough and financially helped enough to not warrant questions, I guess. Then one day a mutual friend they had contacted to tell my grandmother that my grandfather had been shot and was in the hospital. My grandfather was a cop and had been shot on duty. My grandmother didn't like the man he was, but for my mother's sake took her to the hospital to visit him. When they got there he was in his room with his wife and 2 children. Then he introduced his family to his friend and her daughter, and it left my grandmother and mother both speechless and furious. That was the last day my grandfather and mother spoke for over 20 years. My mother was done with being a secret and knew she would be better off without him. It wasn't until last year, after my grandmother had passed, that my mother was contacted by him. She doesn't speak to him anymore, but she does now have a relationship with his daughter, her sister, and they have become fast family and seem to benefit from each other in their lives. I'm not sure if my mother and grandmother were the secret family in this situation, but it takes a real evil mind to live this kind of double life. Felt like using a throwaway for this one. It happened pretty recently, so I have a bit of residual salt left over if you don't mind. This happened maybe 8 months ago. He and my mom got into arguments pretty frequently throughout my childhood, and I was used to him not being around for a while. It happened so often that I never really paid it much attention. However, at that particular point in time, it had been nearly a month since I'd seen him. My mom quietly called me down to the basement to tell me why it had been so long since the last time I'd seen him, as well as the reason why he stopped paying for me to attend college, and the reason we had to move back to our grandparents' house right midway through my first semester. She recently found out that I have a secret half-sister who's maybe 2 years younger than me. She also said that the minute she confronted him about it, he didn't so much as apologize. She was in tears when she begged me not to let my little brother know about it. Recently, he texted me asking if he could borrow $200, even though he knows good and well that I need that money to pay for class. He then says to forget about it, and I think that it's over, but he immediately calls me back saying that he really needs the money. I then told him that my mom wouldn't tolerate him borrowing money from me. He told me to make something up and then meet him somewhere, and I refused because I didn't want to lie to her. He then said that I was being flat out disrespectful considering all that he did for me in the past, and that he wouldn't call me again. So then I think that's the end of it, and a really bittersweet one. But later that day he shows up at my job to ask for the money again. At that point I tell him that I still can't give him the money and that he really has to leave because dealing with that in front of my coworkers and not far from my boss looks really bad. So he leaves in a huff saying, "You know what, I'm done with you." I could tell that I did the right thing in not giving him the money because I felt terrible, but I didn't regret it. He still comes around every once in a while because not everyone in the house knows what happened except for me and my mom. What's really lame is that he basically hides from me. He can't even bring himself to apologize. He still hasn't apologized to my mom for everything he put her through since before I was born. The last time he was here, he left before I even made it down the stairs. I know I'm gonna have to be the bigger person and make the effort to reach out to him someday before I somehow lose the chance, but it's crazy how he was able to ruin the 20 years worth of respect I had for him over the course of a single day. Currently, he's barely even an adult in my eyes. My dad was gone basically every weekend of my life, even around the holidays. He was a prick, so my mom saw it as a break and never really gave a shit about what he was doing. He told us he would go on fishing tournaments with his friend every weekend, that he was part of some fisherman's club. Whatever, he's not at home, who cares? Well, my mom starts talking to some guy from high school who has a wife and a kid. They never did anything physical as far as I know, but my mom was emotionally invested. I can't really blame her that much. Dad was an asshole, I get it. I just wish they'd got divorced a long time ago. But dad finds out my mom is taking to this guy and he just ups and leaves. Dad comes back one day with divorce papers and gives my mom pretty much everything. The house, the car they just co-signed on. A while goes by and this random dude messages my mom on Facebook. Turns out this dude is the ex-husband of this chick that my dad used to work with back when I was a baby. This lady was around a suspicious amount of times then, but my mom gave my dad the benefit of the doubt back then. Even though he was always freaking out that my mom was the one cheating. Turns out my dad just married that chick from back in the day, this guy's ex-wife. This guy fills my mom in that my dad and this chick never really stopped talking and have always been together to some degree. My dad told this chick that my dad and mom were separated. How she believed this, I don't know considering she only saw him on weekends, but I suspect she knew the truth, but just didn't care. This lady's ex-husband told my mom how my dad had gone on family vacations with them since forever. This lady and her ex weren't married very long, got divorced when their kids were like 2 and 3, they're in their early 20s now. So when she started to see my dad, he'd come along on trips with them. My dad would take these week-long trips every year, saying he was going somewhere to fish. Turns out he was really in Disney World. He's been there more times with them than he took my mom and me. The only piece of hard evidence is his insurance center change of address, and the address matched this lady's address that's been in my mom's address book since forever ago. She was also the friend he was fishing with every weekend. I stopped talking to my dad. I cut him out of my life. He fucked with me psychologically, and he only cares about getting his way. The only thing he would talk to me about after he moved out was how I need to tell my mom that she needs to get his name off the house. A process I'm not responsible for, and he won't speak to my mom. I'm better without him and his self-serving bullshit. Sort of. So growing up we would take trips to see my father's mom. I don't call her grandmom because she is a cunt, in Florida, and there was always this old man with her. I asked my dad if that was his dad, and he said no, his dad died in WW2 and this old guy was her husband. I was about 8 at this time. Fast forward to 1995, I was 16 and we go to a family reunion, and I remember seeing my dad very angry and upset, but he didn't say anything that day. When we got back from the family reunion, I heard my mom and dad talking about what happened. Apparently my dad was talking to one of his distant relatives and said he wished he had a chance to know his dad before he died. Well, the relative said, "Your dad isn't dead. I spoke to him last month, he lives in New Mexico." So my dad had asked if she would give him his phone number and she declined, but she said she would give him his address and my dad could write him a letter. If he got a response, great. If not, he had to promise to leave it alone. Well, my dad wrote his letter and few months later he received a phone call from his father. My dad was 38 years old and finally got to hear his father's voice. My dad booked a flight out to meet him the next day. My father mom told my dad his dad died in WW2 and told my grandfather she had a miscarriage. So both of them never knew each other were alive. When my father's mom found out he had made contact with his dad, she became furious and didn't speak to our family for about 10 years. My dad asked me if I wanted to go to his mom's funeral and I declined. But I did go to his father's funeral 2 years ago because he was a good man and a great grandfather. Edit. My grandfather was married with 4 kids and 15 grandkids to his wife NM, and his wife I call grandmom to this day. This happened to my best friend's mom. This is interesting, as they were the secret family. My best friend's father passed away when he was young. His mother, who owned a business at the time, was raising her 2 kids a year apart. While they weren't struggling, her business was unable to grow, since she had to pay herself so much to keep care of the kids. A few years later she runs into her high school sweetheart, and they re-establish connection and eventually start dating. He has 2 kids, near the same age as both of hers. His wife had passed away a year prior, and he works as a regional manager for a very large, very profitable company. So he was rich and sad. He eventually helped them buy a house under her name, which was previously owned by an average paid NFL player, with bedrooms for both set of kids. He bought her a boat. He bought her a car. You name it. With his purchases, she was able to reinvest capital into her business, and it took off fairly well. 2 or 3 years go by, and she's able to afford much nicer things by herself. Around junior year of my friend's HS, around 3 years, things got even more serious, and she starts asking to get married. My friend's sister viewed him as her dad, practically. Never called him that, though. I jokingly called them mom and dad because I spent a good deal of the summer at their house. She knew about his 2 kids, but the 2 kids did not know about them. However, after 3 years he still had never told his kids about his secret family. He explained to them that he was traveling, even during week-long cruises. This continued for another 2 years despite her nagging. He justified as saying he wanted all the kids to graduate high school. This past Christmas, after 5 years, everyone had graduated high school. My friend's mom had had enough. She dug into his friends' lives and they eventually told her that he was still married. His wife was still alive. My friend's mom kept her house and several other things he had bought under her and her kids' name. Her business is now in a great spot and easily provides for her kids' college. This man had 2 full families and spoiled both of them rotten and kept it a secret for 5 years. I'm still pissed. My mother had me and my brother before she knew my father had a real family, so technically we were the secret family, but we have a pretty good relationship with him despite that. Then a week ago, my mother and I visited the college I'll be attending this fall. In the middle of the 2-hour trip to the university, out of the blue she told me that the father I know is not my real father, just my brother's. Turns out she had an affair and had me with another man while they were still together. I met the man once when I was 9. He randomly, but now I know, not so randomly, gave me a birthday gift after just meeting me. Turns out, he has a family of his own with I think 3 kids and a wife. They know nothing about me, and I wanted to stay that way. My mother also told me that he sends us money every month for my expenses, but I have no idea what dear old mom does with it, since she doesn't give me an allowance and my brother's biological dad pays for most of our bills. I cried for about an hour in the car after she told me, and all she said to me then was stop crying. It changes nothing. I didn't speak to her during the tour nor on the way home, and now she's continuing to act like nothing happened and everything's normal. My brother and father have no idea, and I still don't understand why she told me then, or why she said anything at all. TL. Doctor, my family is my father's secret family, but I'm actually the product of a different affair, so I'm technically part of 2 secret families. After my parents' 10th year anniversary church wedding, someone called the church registrar saying that she was the legal wife. The secretary from the registrar proceeded to call my mom to inform her about it. My mom did investigations on her own a full week after the event and eventually found out that my dad now has a daughter with his mistress and has been staying with them 5 days in a week. His excuse was always work is hectic, so I might as well stay at someone's place. Yeah right lol. Mom decided to break the relationship. Annulment is expensive from where we live. Divorce is being discussed in the Supreme Court, and the whole family was in chaos. Grandparents, father's side, wanted custody of 4 of us, me and my 3 brothers, but we fought till they gave up, because we saw how distraught our mom was, and she only had us for support. Our aunt and grandma were living a bit far from where we were. They had a final meeting, asking why my dad decided to cheat for the nth time. He said because I'm a weak man and you are too trusting, so I decided to cheat on you again. A few years later he decided to take away our educational plans and life savings because of gambling addiction. His parents were holding it for us that time because brothers and I were still minors. He forged their signatures and was able to encash all of it. So, yeah 15 years after that, we barely have contact with him, but we know he has a new family, again. We actually saw him again during my second brother's funeral 2 years ago. Didn't communicate as much. Mom is doing okay. Brothers and I are doing okay. Just have terrible trust issues. Edit. Hello yes, to those who are asking, welcome to the Philippines, where annulment is not affordable and divorce is not an option. Yet, I'm supportive of the divorce bill. Ongoing discussion, as I have seen various women and men suffer from being left by their partners due to abuse, neglect, being cheated on, etc. and they are forced to accept that it's how their life will be. When I was around 14 or so, my dad was engaged to be married. She ended up calling off the wedding. I guess she went snooping through his files and discovered he had another kid who lived all the way across the country. My little half brother, Quinn, was already a toddler. Dad went ahead and let us know that the wedding was off. His fiance had left and moved in with her parents, and that we had a half brother, Quinn. This didn't change much of our lives, but I did go online and check out the mom. It turns out I had met her once before. She flew in and stayed for a week and we ended up going to some museums. She seemed nice. Fast forward a few years, my dad has flown out to meet his son once and told the mom that he could not move across the country and abandon the kids he already had. They agree that he will pay child support and send gifts for holidays, and when Quinn is older he may decide whether he wants to have a relationship with my dad or not. After a few years, the gifts started getting returned, and the only contact my dad had was through the courts when he would pay child support. When I was a senior in high school, I reached out to his mom over Facebook. She hadn't posted any pictures or anything of Quinn, so I messaged her and asked if I could fly out to come meet him. She blocked me. After that, I would look him up a few times per year to see if he had a Facebook or an Instagram or any form of social media. The kid was a ghost. It was like he never existed. His immediate family never posted photos or anything about him. All I could find was that he ran cross country and what school he attended. I figured he probably didn't know about us, so I figured I would wait until he turned 18 and then just reach out to him directly if I could find him. Unfortunately, I found out this past January that he passed away at the age of 14. Suicide. His mother didn't tell us, but I found out it is pretty easy to order a death certificate. His obituary was so short and very few people commented on it at all. I think he was a very sheltered child, no social media, no online presence, and when I reached out to his classmates they admitted that he did not have many friends. I was pretty devastated. I called and let my dad know. He was pretty upset as well. I don't know if Quinn ever knew he had any siblings and I can't imagine how alone he felt in his final moments. Rest in peace, Quinn. I wish I would have tried harder to meet you. TL/DR dad had a kid he didn't tell anyone about. Kid killed himself when he became a teenager. My dad, while high on opioids, took me and my sisters to dinner with his secret girlfriend and her mom and kid at an Italian place. He made sex jokes with her the whole time and passed I love you notes back and forth. It was very obvious. I was 11 at the time. I have distinct memories of going to the bathroom 3+ times to cry and scream into my sleeve. He drove us home with more pills and a few espresso shots thrown in the mix. I was in the passenger seat. I stayed alert the entire time, ready to grab the wheel if he fell asleep. He drifted onto the other side of the road numerous times, and I didn't know if we would make it home. Eventually, somehow, we did. Since I was the only one who understood what had happened, my sisters were too young, I had to tell my mom about my dad's secret girlfriend. She thanked me for telling her and hugged me. Was disappointed, but not surprised. That night, I heard them arguing downstairs. I remember my dad say I'm just gonna be a spot of blood on the garage floor, and then she'll know it's all her fault. He was talking about me. Apparently he was holding a knife to his neck. I was 11. A year or so after the fact, my mom found out about at least 5 other women he was involved with, one of which he had been with since before I was born. I'm pretty sure I have half brothers. I don't know how I feel about it. My parents are now divorced, and my dad is engaged to the woman in this story. We don't talk much anymore. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.